Just to see.
Yeah, so there's things a lot.
So how many folks are on there?
We have 3.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, so we're calling the meeting to order. I'm calling the meeting to order, 7:08. On Monday, November 20th. Welcome, everybody. Been a while. Well, why don't we do I'll call the roll. We have 4 commissioners here, right? Alex, Dean, Mark, Rob, and then everybody else. Do we want to go around the room so people know who's who?
Elias Black Review, Sustainability Analyst and Office of Sustainability.
Ariana Vito, Senior Sustainability Analyst.
And Amanda Grossman, Sustainability Analyst.
Dean Pimani, I'm Chair of the Commission.
Nico
Friedhoff, Sustainability Analyst.
Billy Group, Santa Monica resident, co-founder of Tree Hugging Friends, and appointed member of our Honorable Forest Task Force.
I'm Judy Abdo.
That's enough.
If you want to go ahead to open.
Are we on camera?
No,
We're not.
just audio.
Okay, I'll have the trout, I guess.
Those joining online, if you want to introduce yourselves, feel free to unmute and say hello.
Hello, this is Laureen. Did you mean me, Laureen Von Clan?
Hi, Lorraine. Thank you. Who else do we have there? How many people do we have?
You're on mute.
We have 3 other folks. It looks like someone named Janine, and we've got Delana and Chris Dishlip. Great.
It's Jean.
Okay, so meetings to order.
It's Jean Laurie. I'm on the board of Sunset Park. Friends of Sunset Park.
Great, thank you.
Is added this feature.
Yes, we are now allowed to have hybrid meetings. So we can have public comments and presentations virtually now. So we're trying something. I don't know if we have the right technology to continue to do hybrid meetings, but we're doing a test run.
We're required to show up in person.
So I'm just confused. I lived through this in the state in incredibly grisly and difficult manner, but why post pandemic as opposed to during pandemic? Are we going through?
We did the full remote during the pandemic, and then we were asked to come back in person.
Yeah.
But I know a few members of the public have requested that they still have virtual. I think still commissioners are asking for virtual. But then there was some pushback from City Clerk about either staff capacity or technology to do so, hybrid versions. So I think they just got it approved by council to do hybrid as long as we have the technology and staff. The tech.
It's odd timing. It's odd.
Yeah.
All right. I know. Whoa, cheers.
Yeah.
Well, like we just started meeting in person in March.
Yeah.
May was our first in-person meeting, so fairly new that we're meeting back in person.
Is there any way for those of us who are participating virtually to see who is in the in the meeting, apart from,
We don't have cameras unfortunately in this room. I just have my camera. So
okay, so we can see you. All right. Okay. But so oh, there you go. Now we can sort of see.
Right,
Hi,
so-
Ariana.
So for the sake of the folks online, thank you for joining us, and sorry we don't have better technology to make it a little easier, but we'll muddle through and figure it out for future meetings. We are, I will take public input on each of the agenda items, and then there'll be public input at the very end on just general public input if folks want it. Our first items.
We lost Amanda.
She's here. She's here.
okay, you can go ahead, Delana, if you have.
Okay. All right. Can you hear me?
Can I just ask those online if you can mute yourself while we're doing the presentation? Thank you.
Can you hear me, Amanda?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, great. So, hey everybody. Can't see you, but Dean, I heard your voice, so it's nice to hear from you. It's been a long time. Hello to all the commissioners. My name is Delana Benacama, and I will present to you tonight on the city's equity work. Amanda, you can go to the next slide. And so as you can see on this slide, I am one of 3 members of the DEI team. My 2 colleagues, Lisa and David, are listed here on this slide. You can go to the next slide. So I'm going to quickly go over the history of our country and city so we're all on the same page about why advancing equity work is imperative. I'm sure we're all familiar with the Declaration of Independence and the ideals written into it, namely that all men are created equal and that they're endowed by their creator with certain inalienable rights, including life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness. We all know that wasn't true for everyone prior to or after our nation's inception. You know, for example, Native Americans and people who look like me were dehumanized and deemed unworthy of the same rights as the people who look like this nation's founding fathers. And these inequities were baked into our government and laws at both the federal, state, and local levels. You can go to the next slide. The Tongva are the original inhabitants of this land that includes Santa Monica, yet they were displaced from their home and enslaved starting with the arrival of the Spanish and the establishment of the missions. Next slide, please. And so after the Great Depression, the federal government was confronted with the housing shortage, so had to start building new housing communities. And the government created housing policies that ensured that housing in new suburban communities went to white families. Federal Housing Administration deliberately refused to insure mortgages in and near communities of color. And the FHA also subsidized builders who created subdivisions specifically for white families with the stipulation that none of those homes will be sold to people of color. So redlining was a tool used by the federal government to segregate people of color from whites. And today in Santa Monica, as you see on this map, we can still see the impacts of this deliberate act of segregation. The areas colored red and yellow on the map were where people of color resided. And those colors indicated to appraisers that those areas were too risky to insure mortgages. The areas colored blue and green, that's where white people lived, and indicated to appraisers that it was safe to insure mortgages there. So those heterogeneous urban neighborhoods without restrictive covenants were penalized with lower scores. And the use of restricted covenants to keep neighborhoods homogeneous and white was encouraged at the time. You can go to the next slide. So the FHA even created an underwriting manual that recommended that highways would be a good way to separate communities of color from white communities. The neighborhoods where people of color were limited to because of these racial covenants in Santa Monica were selected to be the path of Interstate 10. So you had people of color who were displaced from the historic Broadway district, for example, and also the Pico neighborhood. They were also later displaced from the Belmar neighborhood as a result of the city's declaration of eminent domain in order to make way for the construction of the Civic Auditorium. And this all happened in the 1950s and 60s. Next slide, please. In 1941, when Pearl Harbor was bombed, the government issued an executive order that resulted in the internment of people of Japanese descent, including those who lived in Santa Monica. Those people lost their homes, their businesses, and many never returned to Santa Monica. Next slide. So the brief examples that I just provided demonstrate how government has had an explicit hand in creating and maintaining racial inequities. And down the line, these inequities became more implicit with things like race neutral policies. And those policies continue to yield negative outcomes for marginalized groups. And so that's why it's up to those of us in government, whether we're at the federal, state, or the local level, to undo the harm that's been perpetuated through our advancement of programs, policies, and practices that advance racial equity. You can go to the next slide. The good news in all this is that we've made positive strides here in Santa Monica. Over the past 6 years, staff have undergone training and undertaken many projects to advance racial equity. And it all really started in 2017 with staff from various departments who began joining the Government Alliance on Race and Equity, also known as GARE, and they enrolled in a year-long racial equity training. So staff from our GARE cohorts have been involved in a number of projects, including the Pico Wellbeing Project, the Right to Return, which is an affordable housing program that gives priority to households or descendants of households who were displaced from historic Belmar or along the I-10 freeway. So those are just a couple of the many projects that have been part of the foundational work that we've been doing in Santa Monica since 2017. You can go to the next slide. So in 2020, you saw the formalization of this work. You know, after the murder of George Floyd, many cities started investing in more resources toward this work. And you can see that on this slide, you know, we had 2 positions dedicated to equity, my position, Lisa's position. The City Council approved the racial equity statement that was drafted by members of GARE. The City Council approved the formation of the Racial Equity Committee, which is led by the DEI team, but it also includes staff representatives from every department known as EIOs, and the rollout of affinity groups. We even have you know, an affinity group, the Santa Monica Alliance of White Anti-Racists, which is helping us with our equity work, is for those who identify as white, but also want to explore how they can help with anti-racism. You know, We've also, the City Council provided money to the Black Agenda so that they can form their nonprofit, the Santa Monica Black Lives Association, to be able to do equity work within the community. You can go to the next slide. And so, you know, we've even done things like offer bystander intervention training to community members. We actually just had our latest training on November 13th for United Against Hate Week, and that was very successful. We've provided racial equity training for city leadership, expanded cultural celebrations and observances, and also Cultural Affairs has been working with the consultant Metzley on the Reframe initiative that many of you have probably heard about. So through this initiative, the voices and experiences of communities of color have been brought to the forefront in conversations about the depiction of the First Peoples in the McDonald Wright mural in City Hall. And so Metzley just recently released his recommendations on addressing the mural, one of which is commissioning new artwork. Next slide. And so the Racial Equity Committee has rolled out many projects, including a bank of DEI questions, which we are using, at least the HR department is using for all job interviews. There's a glossary of equity terms that I'm working with the equity and inclusion officers on, and we plan to roll that out in 2024. First to staff, and along with a training on those terms. And one thing I do want to mention is that last year the Public Works Department rolled out a mandatory training for their staff on all gender facilities to support inclusion. And this was a very timely project since Santa Monica co-sponsored a Senate bill with West Hollywood. And that was passed by the governor, and the bill has allowed our city and other local agencies to expand access to inclusive all gender restroom facilities. Next slide. So in addition to all those projects that I've mentioned and the projects that you saw on the previous slide, the DEI team is working closely with the EIOs and the departments to help them advance department-specific equity projects. For example, right now we're working with the Community Development Department to help them apply for grant funding as they explore a cannabis equity program at the City Council's direction. Next slide. And finally, I want to talk about our citywide equity plan. Although we've rolled out many equity-related programs and initiatives over the year, our team is leading the creation of our first citywide equity plan. So right now we're in the process of engaging the community at large and also engaging staff internally. This fall, we launched an equity grant program where we provided residents and community-based organizations with $500 in funding to hold listening sessions. We plan to do a call for grant applications again this spring, and you're welcome to apply to hold a session, people on this call. And then commissioners, you're welcome to apply to hold a session as an individual once we open applications again. And after we receive everyone's feedback on priorities, our team will analyze the information, identify shared priorities, meet internally with the departments to find out what we're already doing that may address some of the feedback, and then figure out any new things that we could feasibly roll out. And from there, we'll plan to start drafting the equity plan. So we're just really excited about this work. And that concludes my presentation.
Questions or comments? For the equity plan.
There's an echo. I can't understand.
Can you hear us now? Or hear me?
I can hear you.
Just what's the timeline for plan development?
What's the timeline for plan development?
So this plan development is going through next year. You know, we plan to provide an info item to the city council, I think early next year, maybe in January, just on our progress. As far as what we've learned so far from the listening session. And we're opening up listening sessions again in the spring. So sometime next year, although I don't have the timing right off the top of my head.
Yeah. You got.
Yeah, just, thanks for the presentation. It was a lot going on there. Great. Do you have thoughts, I mean, how we should engage with you on mental justice issues? What are good ways to do that?
Amanda, can you repeat what was said?
How can he or how can they interact with you and engage with you on environmental justice issues?
Yeah, I mean, I think there is opportunity for collaboration, and Amanda, I'm gonna bring you into it since you're the liaison, but I think we could sort of work together to figure something out. And I think a first step is having you hold a listening session as an individual, bringing like-minded folks into your listening session who are interested, you know, in sustainability, environmental justice, the environment, to provide that feedback to us. You know, I'm not sure if you want to work with Amanda and OSC to, you know, maybe have like, you know, them have an internal working group or anything like that, but you know, we'd be happy to work with OSC.
So Delana, they want to agendize something in this commission meeting. So
Okay.
looking at your timeline, we can figure out what's the best date for that.
Okay.
One commissioner said, "Thank you for all your work."
I didn't hear anything about the LGBTQ community, but I hope that equity includes us.
Yeah, so you know, when we talk about this work, at least I refer to it as racial equity. Some people refer to it as, you know, DEI work, but I just want to mention that we do lead with race, but that doesn't leave out the other groups at all. Like our work touches all of the marginalized groups. And so we've even had community members who have held listening sessions that were specifically, the focus of those listening sessions are the LGBTQ plus community. So I just wanted to mention that as well. We make sure that we're touching all folks, especially all marginalized groups. So when I say racial equity, it just means that we lead with race, because if you look across all social identities, people who are racialized minorities, their outcomes are worse, right? So if you're looking at me as a Black woman versus, you know, a white woman, my outcomes potentially would be worse than somebody who's not part of a racialized minority. And so that's why we lead with race.
I think you need some education on what it's like to be LGBT. But that's what, you don't have to answer that.
And then just another thing. So like when we're talking about like marginalized groups within the LGBTQ plus community, when you have people in that community who are racialized minorities, right? Like they tend to fare worse, right? A person of color within that group than somebody who is not a racialized minority. And that's where we sort of get into the term intersectionality, right? Because a person within that community can have multiple identities and they are impacted by those multiple identities, race included, that causes them to be sort of impacted by all of those inequalities. Dr. Kimberly Crenshaw gives a great analogy about this. She sort of gives an analogy about someone standing in a traffic intersection, right? And so, yes, you could be like a woman, but you may have like other identities, right? You're like low income. You may be like a person of color. You may have a disability. So this person with all of these multiple identities are basically affected by all of those, the inequities that come along with all of those different social identities.
Yes, thank you very, very much for this timely presentation. Happy Thanksgiving, happy holidays, and happy New Year. I agree with Judy Abdo. I think that I see it on the agenda here, this equity plan. I think that even though there can be a focus on certain strategic things that are so crucially important that happened in the past, that the goal would be to broaden it, to make it equity for all. And I think that would be beneficial for the group you're working with. And just like you're here today to talk to the Environmental Commission, to say how, show how the Environmental Commission should pay attention to what your equity endeavors are about and how that can even affect our environment. So I just feel that the broadest possible outreach that can be done, the more effective it's going to be without sacrificing anything else like the apology the city made and all the other things that are happening. Very important. I mean, I've been seeing some anti-Semitism too. Jewish. I hope that everyone would be open to that as well. We just have the hate week, the anti-hate week proclamation that Mayor Davis distributed. I hope that, that anyone that's talking about equity, I'm sure it goes almost without saying, I'm sure you're keen on this idea as well. And I think it is important to have that dialogue and be open to it. Thank you, Jerry.
It looks like we may have a question from someone else on the line. Maureen?
Yes, thank you. I have been participating and following to the best extent possible the reparations discussions. And I'm wondering if Santa Monica is doing anything more in the area of reparations than it has already done, and if we're doing anything to prepare ourselves for something that may happen, if we're lucky, at the state level to foster reparations.
There have been conversations about that, and we're hearing from community members, but we don't have anything sort of in the pipeline for that, right? Like we're sort of engaging the community in those discussions right now, and we do have some community members who have had listening sessions, or who came to us with the Black apology that have mentioned reparations, but again, there's nothing that's been formalized because this is sort of an engagement process for us to sort of look into what it is that we could feasibly do.
Any other questions or comments?
So it sounds like it was informational. If commissioners hadn't, or other folks hadn't noticed in the agenda packet, there was a pretty detailed council report about this that provides a lot more background and summary, which is a good read to find out what's going on. And sounds like we will agendize at a future meeting a discussion about environmental justice that we can feed into this bigger discussion. Judy has a question.
Yeah, I just want to say I applied for one of the grants, the $500 grants for the LGBT group that has just formed in the last month. And we've had 2 events. One was at Lila's just to meet people, and we had 40 people. It was totally unexpected that there would be that many. And then we had a meeting at my house that was also social Thanksgiving kind of thing, but we sat down and through the questionnaire, and we had 30 people. So people are really interested in this particular group was fabulous.
Fantastic. Great. All right. Well, thank you, Delana. And thanks to you.
Thank you.
And we are now on to item 1B, which is our greenhouse gas inventory. Nico is taking that one away.
Mirror the screen.
Yeah.
If it messes, you're actually,
It should be able to, if you click on present, it should have a display here.
oh, well, okay. I think it might need to. Oh no, we're good. Perfect.
Can you guys see that screen online?
We'll take that as yes. Alrighty, thanks for coming out, everybody. Happy pre-Thanksgiving. I hope you all have some exciting Thanksgiving plans coming up. Today I'll be giving an overview of Santa Monica's 2022 citywide community and municipal greenhouse gas emissions inventories. So for some background, we do emissions inventories for a few reasons. We do emissions inventories for our own benefit as a city, to better benchmark our emissions and to have a better understanding of how our climate action goals are coming along, and what we need to do to stay in line with those climate action goals. In addition, our commitment to GCOM, the Global Covenant of Mayors, we are fulfilling voluntary reporting requirements by reporting to a few different organizations, including the Carbon Disclosure Project, World Wildlife Fund One Planet City Challenge, and the UN Race to Zero. To put our GHG emissions inventories together, Santa Monica follows the global protocol for community scale GHG inventories, and we report data through ICLEI's ClearPath tool. Santa Monica uses a sector-based emissions inventory, which I'll break down in a sec, and we complete both community and municipal greenhouse gas emissions inventories. Just as a reminder, to remind folks what the different scopes of emissions are, that graphic on the right is helpful. There are 4 main sectors within our greenhouse gas emissions inventory that we report on. We report on building energy, where we amass utility bill data from Clean Power Alliance, SoCal Edison, and SoCal Gas. Transportation data using Google's Environmental Insights Explorer, where the city takes responsible for 100% of the emissions occurring from inbound trips and 50% of emissions from trips that start or end in Santa Monica. It's called the origin destination methodology. Waste emissions generated from landfill waste and compost decomposition, and aviation emissions, which uses airplane fuel consumption data. Zooming out to kind of get a better look at citywide emissions trends that are from 1990 until now, there are a few major takeaways I'd like to highlight. The main one being that emissions have decreased 10% below 1990 levels in 10% below 2019 levels in 2022. overall, we are 48% below 1990 levels in 2022. And this leaves an additional 32% reductions necessary by 2030 to meet our cap goal of 80% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions below 1990 levels by 2030. Here's a snapshot of our 2020 greenhouse gas emissions inventory. This was the most recent inventory we completed before 2022, where we can see that 62% of emissions came from the transportation sector, 23% came from the combustion of natural gas in the building sector, 9% came from emissions associated with electricity usage, combining for a 32% total coming from the building sector. You can see the breakdown of building electricity usage from residential and commercial sector based on participation in clean power lines versus SoCal Edison. And the remaining percentages come from landfill or compost waste emissions in aviation. Now, looking at 2022, almost 70% of emissions are coming from transportation, with 26% emissions coming from the building sector. In 2020, that number was 32%. One thing I'd like to point out here are the participation rates in clean power lines. So where different building sectors are getting their energy from. And you can see the difference in the commercial and industrial participation in clean power lines generated electricity. In both 2020 and 2022, the commercial buildings also have been the largest users of natural gas as well, even in 2020 during COVID. But yeah, the clean power lines generated is that 100% green power. Since 2020 was an outlier due to reduced economic activity for COVID, we decided it was best to make most of our comparisons to 2019 to benchmark how far we have. Since business as usual has resumed more or less. So looking over to the table on the right, we found a 19% reduction in vehicle transportation emissions from 2019, a 7% reduction in building gas emissions, a 75% increase in emissions related to building electricity usage, which I'll get to in a moment, a 5% increase in landfill waste, and 2% decrease in aviation-related emissions. After. Focusing on the transportation sector, we can see that COVID significantly curbed the number of vehicle miles traveled. Since then, vehicle travel has resumed more or less to normal, with a slight decrease from 2019 to 2022 in vehicle miles traveled. With this decrease, however, there's been a noticeable decrease in vehicle emissions, that 9% compared to that 19% reduction in emissions. And that's largely due to the increased number of EVs and a cleaner power mix. And this is all calculated Google's Environmental Insights Explorer. And those vehicle miles traveled are plugged into ICLEI ClearPath. And then in regards to building emissions, we saw an overall 7% reduction in emissions on-site natural gas use from 2019 to 22, and that 75% increase in building electricity emissions. The reason being, in 2019, when the city began participating in CPA, accounts were automatically defaulted to the 100% green power program. And since then, many commercial users have opted out, resulting in that increase in building emissions. And they are now on SCE's default blend of electricity. So for the municipal greenhouse gas emissions inventory, the building and facility emissions are entirely from gas usage, presents an opportunity for the city to look into some of our municipal facilities and figure out where we can electrify. Water and wastewater emissions from LADWP Energy were offset via renewable energy credits. And the reduction in transit and fleet emissions since 2018 was due to the use of renewable natural gas in fleet and transit operations. And we are also working to include employee commute data in future inventories. Relative to broader guidance, I figured it would do us some justice to look at where our current climate action goals stand. The most recent 2023 IPCC climate change report shows that global CO2 emissions need to peak by 2025 and reduce 48% by 2030 relative to 1990 levels to limit warming below 1.5 C. In recent years, the city has used ICLEI generated science-based targets. This year it was recommended that we use the World Wildlife Fund's One Planet City Challenge methodology, kind of a mouthful, to benchmark our interim science-based targets at 2030. That target sets a 61% reduction from the 2018 baseline, leaving us with a absolute emissions target of around 350,000 metric tons of CO2 by 2030. Our climate action plan, which sets an 80% reduction goal by 2030, is more aggressive than that, where our absolute emissions target is around 277,000 metric tons of CO2. And once again, that is the 80% reduction by 2030. So this is, one of the things that a lot of different reporting takes a look at is how aggressive our climate action goals are compared to most recent science-based target guidance. And then just to give an overview of how these different sectors might be impacted in the future by federal, state, local programs and policies. In the transportation sector, big news this year with Newsom's recent executive order to restrict the sale of gas cars by 2035. Widespread federal incentives have shown to be supportive of the EV transition, and also the city's own work to support local EV adoption and infrastructure. With regards to building electrification, the city is looking into policy options such as existing building breach codes and building performance standards, as well as state regulatory efforts to ban the sale of gas appliances that produce nitrous oxide, as was the recent Bay Area Air Quality Management District ruling, looking at NOx nitrous oxides. And then the Inflation Reduction Act, home and HERA incentives, and our own Electrify Santa Monica program are supportive of chipping away at that upfront cost barrier of electrification. And then in terms of waste, the city is reducing landfill waste by complying with SB 1383, and the airport is scheduled to close by 2028. So aviation emissions, no more. That is all I have for you today. I'm sure you have many questions, so I'll open up the floor. Not just questions, but recommendations as well for how we should proceed with the data from this year's inventory. And yeah.
I have a question. It maybe I'm getting grumpier as I get older, but it seems like the traffic is worse than it was before the pandemic. Do you have any figures on that?
We're actually just taking questions from commissioners right now, and we'll get to others once the commissioners.
Yeah, can you go back just to where you're explaining how all the transportation emissions are done?
Yes. Jean, we're taking questions from commissioners. We'll jump back to you in 1 moment.
Thank you.
This one?
Is this just cars registered in Santa Monica?
So this is national default data. This is not from Santa Monica's. And yeah, that's a 19% decrease in vehicle emissions from 2019. Correct. There's a 9% decrease in vehicle miles traveled.
Yeah, and do you do anything with forestry? I mean, I don't really know the numbers, but those numbers tend to be off. Like when people try to match emission inventories, sensing stuff, you end up being off by kind of 10%-ish off the LA basin because of, people cutting down trees and stuff like that.
Sure.
Any of that?
We didn't this year. There is an option to include agricultural, forestry, and land use in the ClearPath calculator. We I reached out to our urban forest division and they didn't really have the bandwidth to supply that data to us this year. So we're looking to include that in years to come.
Essentially ground-based sensors as part of NASA GHG monitoring system for the LA basin, but never really done much with the data. So let us know.
Yeah, absolutely. It would be interesting to take a look at. Yeah, sure. CO2 sensors. Yeah. Huh.
Other commissioners?
Yeah, a couple. I mean, I'm glad you brought up the trees. I was going to bring something up related to that as well.
Mhm.
It does feel like the forest canopy took quite a hit during the drought. So I just think it's going to be significant. Maybe I'm incredibly biased because my block no longer has any trees at all. And it used to be completely covered with 70-year-old ficuses. And yeah, 7 months since it got out.
Your blog was
No, but I think my entire community, and so it's probably trees, like a few block area. So I'm just saying, in our house in particular, we also lost 4 smaller ficuses in the last drought. So I'm just saying, there's a lot that's occurred throughout the entire community. And every time that happens, we lose an adult mature tree, it gets replaced by a 5-foot tall thing without any canopy at all. So it's substantial. The other thing is, I was just wondering from the standpoint of weighing in on what's going on, because you're saying you have the World Wildlife Fund sort of approach, et cetera. The California approach on greenhouse gas emissions in completely ignoring port emissions and wildfire emissions is such a huge deal. And I'm just wondering whether this association or, you've been so engaged with other sustainable cities for so long, other green cities, whether that's something that you can push for on the agenda, because we're giving such a misleading, optimistic viewpoint of where we are on greenhouse gas emissions by ignoring just those 2 things alone, wildfire and ports, it's pretty disturbing. And so is that something we can do?
I think that's good perspective. I would defer to this sort of regional collaboration approach and can bring it up in the Green Cities Collaborative to see if there's anything that the cities can do to push the agenda on the state level. But yeah, no, I think that's a really good perspective.
Thank you.
And Mark, could you just restate that though? You're saying the state is not factoring as part of California.
As part of their inventory analysis, they're ignoring wildfire and well, because a lot of the ports is shipping. So their logic is we have never that at all. Because that's an international thing. So it means less emissions.
Ignoring doesn't make it go away.
Okay, thank you for clarifying.
Yeah.
Next question.
And then Mark, real quick on the forestry thing, we can retroactively calculate that if we get the data from urban forestry from this past year, but we can still go in and do that. Yeah.
Our commission and Jerry Rubin.
Yeah,
On the tree committee.
exactly. They want it. Okay. Heard.
On the GAT, one of the things I remember when I was at UCLA, we did these, and we did climate and air in LA County. One of the things that shocked me tremendously, and you had a bunch of items on this, so I was just curious about your perspective. On the natural gas side was basically flat for the last 15 years. Like, despite all the talk about it, despite everything else, the overall natural gas use in LA County was pretty flat.
Didn't change at all.
Yeah, and so obviously it's such a huge part of emissions. You mentioned some pretty, bold approaches, et cetera. Where are we?
In terms of
Being able to actually implement some of the policy recommendations that you have.
yeah, absolutely. So I can go to where I had policy recommendations. We are participating in Clean Power Alliance existing building reach code program to target some of the smaller single and multifamily buildings in Santa Monica. It would be something like a time of replacement or time of sale policy, time of replacement at major renovation policy. We don't know exactly what that would look like. Timeline for that is end of 2024. Building performance standards, we are currently in the process of doing working group meetings, doing outreach, aiming to go to council for building performance standards for large buildings over 50,000 square feet, probably early next summer to late next spring. So these will be agenda items to come most definitely. The large commercial multifamily users, it's like the most bang for our buck without kind of using up too much of our bandwidth to run the program.
And then our plan is to simultaneously adopt benchmarking requirements for smaller buildings, so anything not captured in the and then the BPS would apply to the buildings going down to 25.
Correct. The 50,000 square foot would be phase one. And I have figures on the emissions reductions potential from implementing BPS that I can. Exactly. Eventually.
The other shocker, obviously, was the electricity value.
Yeah.
And what that meant was not, how many customers jumped ship and decided they were no longer environmental?
We don't have a good sense of what the actual number of customers are, who they are.
And that impact had to be. I don't know.
It's multiple, but yeah. It's multiple big commercial users. Correct. Yeah, that's our assumption at least, and you can see it in the commercial use.
What's like, me as a member of the public, you can say, oh, that data has to be anonymized, and so I have no access to it.
We've reached out.
For you as a member of the city, you should be able to have access. Okay, who changed?
We don't. Yeah, we tried to reach out to CPA. Yeah.
That was the question I was going to ask as well, is find out who these.
No, yeah. So
well, we know that, it's a commercial stuff.
Commercial and industrial, but yeah.
As far as I know.
Yeah, I think this is the most granular we can get.
Themselves a certain session, right? And so, the number of times I had to talk to people, PUC, CEC, DWP, and WD on this was and there was all sorts of discussions on, well, can you give it to us by zip? Can you give it to us by census code? Can you give it to us by sector. And the thing is, if it was, an example that was given, electricity use, that was taboo was, if the sector would turn out to be a studio, and you already knew that it was, in this census tract, it's like, yeah, it was freaking pops, like, hey, yeah, figure it out, right? And so there's some discretion on what can be shared and not shared. And I think I would not just leave it as, we're not going to share it, we're not going to give you the data. And I think you can make that argument. Like you just, you can keep your policy private, you don't need to go public with it. And maybe there's some sort of, NDA or something you can sign on that. Or the fact that it's spread out enough, so what, we know it's not what's less sector, 30 hotels. We don't know which one that.
We'll keep pushing.
Maybe what we can do on that side is recommend the staff look into that a little down CPA. I know you've talked to them. I've talked to them and been told like hard no, but
Yeah.
just push them and ask the questions that Mark's asking and
Sure.
if possible, bring them in.
Yeah. One
I know.
One more side note on the CPA commercial users thing issue. Is that in the building performance standards policy, we're considering incentivizing the large commercial buildings if they opt back into CPA, could generate compliance.
Yeah, that's good.
I just had a question on that process. I feel like on my electric bill, I can still opt out anytime. Is that the case with these? I feel like we.
Correct.
Is there any way to do that? Just to say, okay, oh, and then like that. Cancel. Option.
Yeah.
And I had a question. You mentioned this new target, the World Wildlife Fund target. When I was looking through this earlier tonight, it was confusing. Are you recommending changing the target?
No, so to my understanding, when we've done greenhouse gas emissions inventories, we've used ICLEI's pre-calculated targets. ICLEI and other staff recommended that we use World Wildlife Fund's methodology to develop our own, not develop our own target, but it's basically a formula where you plug in 2018 baseline data and it spits out the 2030 target. So that's what we went with this year.
Council's adopted. I mean, I don't understand it's just like a mathematical problem you're just dealing with, or
Essentially, that's
you haven't changed the 80%.
No. So no, just comparing the 80% target to the Wildlife Fund One Planet City Challenge methodology. Yeah, just a comparison. Yeah. Yeah, we just would. Okay, I appreciate that. Yeah.
Yeah, well, one of the things when UCLA was doing all this I was there years ago, we never were able to get scope 3 in any way, shape, or form. So everything in the UC system did on reduction was also at 1 and 2. And so how were you able to, in light of knowing that was a problem back then, I assume still a problem today, how are you able to arrive at accurate emission assessments?
We got scope 3 waste decomposition data from our waste department. And I think the landfills and compost landfills track that and send that over to waste, and then that's where we got it.
What about travel? That was the thing. Couldn't really come up with that very accurately. Not to mention if you start, and this is where I would ask Rob or you, I'm ignorant on this, that, you know, when you stop counting that from the standpoint of what you purchase, you know, supply chain oriented stuff as well, but at least, so looking at those two separate things, which is the travel side and getting that accurate, and then the second side would be, you know, anything to do with purchasing.
Yeah, so in terms of travel, it was the, you know, Google Environmental Insights Explorer data, vehicle miles travel we used. Air travel, it was only aviation fuel use data that we got from the local airport. But in terms of none of the broader, yes, people who live in Santa Monica traveling individual footprints, no. Yeah. Correct.
And I mean, it seems to me that for air travel based on per capita, some fact.
Yeah.
Nope. Oh, really? I don't think we would know.
I don't know about, well, let's ask Rob. I mean, could you come up with a rough ballpark per capita scope 3 figure for travel?
But of course you could.
Well, I mean, so first off, let me ask, on a beach day, all these cars driving to Santa Monica, what part of that are you counting?
Half of that. If they're driving from out of city limits, half of that. If they're driving from in city limits, all of that.
Okay. And so if they like drive from way across the basin, you count it half.
Correct. Assuming that the other jurisdiction would count the other half.
Okay, so there's like a lot of factors.
Definitely. Definitely.
I guess so. My question is about estimating capital basis. To be looking at, I mean, the idea is to get people to pay attention to, you know, here's a big chunk of greenhouse gas emissions we have to be measuring. It's not 100% accurate, but as you live on the west side and, you know, affluent, and it's estimated that your air travel footprint,
I mean,
cabinet is X%.
I mean, presumably you could, I mean, does ICLEI, I mean.
Elias, do you recall if ICLEI has? Yeah.
The issue is you would easily go to Santa Monica. You know, rich people like us fly around a lot, right? And we can.
Especially if you work for
You can start to stay home.
Yeah, but then how would you know, I mean, if you're just using sort of, you know, national averages, how would you know that if you did anything?
Yeah, well, I mean, the point, I think, from my point of view, is making people aware that it's an issue. And, oh, that's something else you've got.
Yeah, so I mean, you could, I suppose, have, you know, stuff that we, you know, we're measuring and think we have some effect on, and are actually measuring based on stuff that's going on in the city, and then just sort of this other, you know, things we're not counting, but here's.
Yeah, and you know, there's, I think within the transportation, there's enough estimation going on already that doesn't, you know.
Okay, well, I've taken us far enough off course.
Why don't we
But,
go
but,
to,
you know, how do you deal with like trucking all the products that are here and distribute? So, you know, here we have all these, you know, tons of different retail things going on and that taken into consideration?
That would all be vehicle miles traveled. It would account for heavy duty trucks, vehicle miles traveled. So
that-
yeah, that would show up. Correct.
Do you have those estimates? You feel okay about them?
Yeah, if Google does, we do. It's cell phone data from Google. Yeah. Yeah.
The product footprint would be where it starts to where it finishes.
Yeah, where
from the port. Isn't this your life, man?
Let's get through the rest of our.
Sure.
Thank you, Dean. Well, great presentation. Two things. First of all, I feel sad that these big businesses have opted out. You know, I thought everybody was getting behind this when I remember. I mean, I don't know if they had opted in and then decided to opt out.
So in 2019, they would have been defaulted in when we began participating in CPA.
I don't know what the word is, but the fact is there. The community should know that businesses need to be talked to and our people.
Yeah,
Whatever.
same page.
Any evaluation of who must get their electrified fleets, and they'll read that they're going to be stepping that up and how effective that'll be. And I think it's a great thing. And if it's been effective already, and some of the few electric buses that they have got.
Yeah, absolutely. They're ramping it up. Ariana, do you have any?
I have 3 of them. I bought another 19. I think, and so they're phasing out the gas buses. They're replacing all of them with electric, and so their goal is to have all be electric. Yeah, I think they're at around 20 right now. So I mean, that's obviously that's a.
And yeah, in our municipal inventory, we saw significant reductions in fleet and public transport emissions since 2018.
Well, just on that, figuring out how to use data without giving everybody's stuff. I get these letters that say you have used X amount of percentage more. And I can't remember whether it's water or electricity or it's not gas, but than the typical user or something like that. And it seems to me that you could use the statistics that you have, at least for water. I don't know how you get it from the CPA or Edison. And I don't know how you get the gas company to tell you. But there are measures that they can do without revealing which address.
Yeah, but getting you as an individual customer, not as some researcher or city or whatever, that's where they start being.
Yeah.
Right.
And actually, yeah,
They're the worst.
and now CPA, they're not CPA
Right.
It's members anymore, so they're back as the gas company. Unfortunately, it's a problem. Should we go, do we have a question online?
Yes, for any online participants, feel free to ask questions.
This is Jean Laurie. I have a question. It seems like to me that the traffic is much worse recently, worse than before the pandemic. Is that my imagination, or do you have any figures on that? Or, I mean, the lines to turn left and so forth are much longer and just
So
so much traffic.
yeah, sorry, it's a lot of graphic. Here's zooming in on the left. 2019 is the bar on the left at around 800,000 metric tons of CO2 for the total emissions inventory that year. 2022 is on the far right, and 2020 during the pandemic is in the middle. So we've come down in total 10% from 2019. So we're doing better
Do you have
than
any
before the pandemic.
Do you have any information on 2023?
No, not yet. We would need to complete the year and then collect all the data to
Yeah,
understand.
I don't think it's my imagination. The traffic to me seems, of course, there's so many road blockages, it slows up traffic too, but even without that, it just seems like the traffic is much heavier than before the pandemic.
I think we're all eager to see if 2023 will be more than 2022 in terms
Okay,
of transportation and other sectors.
thank you.
May
other
I ask a question? Yes, this is Laureen Von Clan.
Hi, Lorraine.
Hi, Nico. Yeah, I have sort of a comment and a question. One is related to this question of large energy users and needing to get them to make the switch. I would like to put forth to this commission that there's actually sort of a deadline on this, which is that a lot of these users have been in direct access accounts that will probably, from what we know through the grapevine, be renewed sometime next June. Or that, they will have to sign new contracts. So if we want to prevent them from making that switch, we need to try to figure out something fairly soon. If we want to prevent them from continuing to be out of 100% clean renewable. The other piece of this is that for large energy users like the college, Santa Monica College and the Santa Monica School District, the marginal amounts that they're paying to be on dirty energy, the marginal savings are quite small, really, given that they have $1 million energy budgets. It's about $80,000 or so to go to make the jump to 100% clean renewable. There must be some way to figure out how to incentivize that switch. It's not nothing, $80,000 when you're running a school district or a college that is trying to save money, but it's not a lot given what we're up to. I mean, the school district or the college, somewhere between 1,200, the equivalent of 1,200 or 2,000 homes being on 100% clean renewable energy. So I'm putting forth to the commission that maybe there's some advice here for figuring out something, if we can, with the CPA fairly quickly. The other thought that I have is that I'm just wondering, based on this greenhouse gas inventory, maybe I missed it, but is there a punchline or a bottom line that comes out of this that says we are on track or we're not on track? What does this reveal? Anything, or is that going to come out of a study of the cap, a report on the cap?
Reveals that we are on track and our emissions are continuing to decline post-pandemic.
So we think if we continue at this rate, we will meet our targets?
Yes, we haven't done modeling necessarily, thinking about the various state policies, programs that I mentioned, the resulting decarbonization from those various policies. That could be something we can look into.
Well,
But
if
yes,
we're on track, yeehaw, hooray for us. I mean, this is just fabulous. We should all be delighted. Wonderful. Wow, that's great news. If that's the takeaway. So that was my question.
Yeah.
Thank you.
A really great point, Maureen. And follow-up is, what are you planning to, what's OSC planning to do with this inventory? I mean, is there going to be publicity around it? And if so, let's use that to push, here's some great news. Here's the next, we're not there yet.
we're way ahead of you. We worked with comms to release a blog last month, which was well received. I don't know that it was a blog, so I don't know that any of the press wrote about it. And then we pushed it out through a newsletter and social media as well. But similar headlines as, yes, we are on track. Our emissions continue to decline. Good news. Here's what we need to work on.
This is a pretty good Santa Monica. I mean, that should be an LA Times kind of thing. And if there's an effort to push that out, just because it shows that, this goes back to the leadership from the sustainability program. We can show other cities that you can actually cut your emissions. You look at these 80% reduction targets, and there's, I'm sure, tons of them all over the country that are like, no way in hell we're ever going to do this. So I would advocate for the city really trying to push this hard so that people can see that we're actually doing a fantastic job here and get other people asking, how the hell are you guys doing?
Absolutely. And Lorraine, thank you for that. We all express your the same excitement. Mm-hmm.
A public information officer about,
Yeah, we worked together and she was like, let's do a blog post. And I was like, maybe we could do a press release.
Going to the climate action center. This exact stuff, and you've got lots of people now talking about spirals and everything.
Mm-hmm.
Let's put out some positive news. Hey, there's some people out here who are actually getting this done, and here's how the perfect thing to use to get.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much, Nico. It's really very helpful.
Great. Thank you, guys. Oh, I don't know.
All right. To 1C is e-bike vouchers program.
Yes. Shut your split screen.
Got it. Okay, thank you. All right. Hi, everybody. Moving from GHG emissions to a specific program that OSC is working on to hopefully make a dent in those emissions. I'm here to talk about a new income verified e-bike voucher program that OSC has been developing over the last couple months. And we're not looking for any specific direction or action from the commission, but just want to keep you all updated on our progress and give you a chance to share input since it's a pretty exciting and innovative program. And ironically, we've been looking at doing a program like this for a number of months, and then council came to us and actually requested the same thing. Mayor Davis and council members Zwick and Torosis actually came to OSC and asked us to look into a program like this, and we had already actually started on it. So there's a lot of alignment around this being a good program for Santa Monica. And just for some context, I am working on this program with Peter Rockmore in the Office of Sustainability and the Environment. OSC is leading program implementation and design, but partnering really closely with our colleagues in mobility. And we learned a lot from colleagues in different departments at the city who've managed vouchers or similar community grants, because that's uncharted territory for OSE. A little bit of background on how we decided to move forward with this program and how it's getting funded. The federal government, through the Department of Energy, has developed a new grant program funded by the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law called Energy Efficiency and Conservation Block Grant Program, or EECBG for short. And this is a formula grant program, so it's non-competitive. Basically, jurisdictions across the country were given access to a lump sum of money based on their population. And in Santa Monica, we are eligible for almost $158,000 in straight up formula grants from Department of Energy because of that law that was passed a few years ago. And the program is pretty broad in how it's designed. Basically, the goal is just to assist states and local jurisdictions in implementing programs or other strategies to reduce energy use, reduce fossil fuel emissions, improve energy efficiency. So really broad mandate. And in Santa Monica specifically, we are eyeing an e-bike program because of its ability to encourage sustainable mobility, reduce emissions, allow folks to get around in a more clean and efficient way. And then there's also the environmental health benefits of having fewer cars on the road and the economic benefits of partnering with local bike shops in Santa Monica. So I should mention that the CAP has some explicit goals that sort of tie, like Nico mentioned, we've got that big goal of reducing emissions 80% by 2030, but then in the transportation section, we have a specific goal to convert at least 50% of local trips in Santa Monica to active transportation. So foot traffic, bikes, skateboards, scooters, all that sort of thing. In terms of funding, like I mentioned, we've got a little bit less than $158,000 coming directly from this Department of Energy grant. And then Office of Sustainability and the Environment is pitching in $26,000 from this fiscal year's budget to supplement that grant program. So in total, we've got a little bit less than $184,000 going towards this e-bike program. And then one more exciting piece of news about this program is that we were selected to receive a fellow, a full-time fellow, paid for by the Department of Energy to support the implementation of our grant. And for Santa Monica, that means implementation of this e-bike voucher program. So hopefully that person will be onboarded soon. One thing I really just want to harp on is that there's a difference between a traditional rebate and this voucher program that we're trying to develop here in Santa Monica. So when we're first thinking about, how can we get more clean transportation out into the community in an equitable way, we were really wanting to ensure that the program was useful for low and moderate income residents of Santa Monica. And one thing that we've noticed, OSE runs the Electrify Santa Monica rebate that gives standard traditional rebates to folks for swapping out gas appliances with electric. What we've noticed from a few years of running that program is that even though Santa Monica offers a higher rebate amount for low-income folks, they're not using the program anywhere close to as much as folks who are not low-income. So there's sort of a barrier to entry there, which we're assuming is because of the upfront cost of having to install an appliance or go through a fuel switching project and then be reimbursed by the city and other entities. So we're designing this program so that the voucher recipients, the e-bike voucher recipients, don't need to pay the upfront cost for their e-bike, but we actually, as the city, partner with local bike shops and pay that bike shop directly the amount of the voucher when a voucher recipient redeems their voucher at that bike shop. So, like I said, this removes that upfront cost hurdle for low-income residents. It's also supporting local businesses by keeping that money in Santa Monica. And then it's a pretty innovative way to design a program. There's not many other cities at this point have that same type of program where you're reducing that upfront cost burden. And we think it'll help pave the way for hopefully future programs that allow the cities to sort of directly make payments to vendors to help folks get around or live more sustainably. So here's a quick snapshot of what we're thinking about in terms of program design. And this is based on OSE's research into the issue, conversations with colleagues in mobility, talks with local bike shops, community groups who are more engaged in bike advocacy and all those sorts of things, and then other cities who've gone through the process of developing similar programs. So in terms of income qualification thresholds, we want to cast a pretty wide net in terms of ways that folks can show eligibility for the program. The easiest way we think to design it is to allow folks to demonstrate that they're at or below a certain income level by already being enrolled in a program that's basically vetted them for that low income status. So things like utility programs, CARE, FERA, local free and reduced lunch programs, or being a recipient of a housing voucher. And we've got a number of other ways that folks can show eligibility. And then if a person isn't already enrolled in a program like that, we have a really simple income verification form so that they can show that they're at 80% area median income or below, which is how we currently design the low income requirement for our community gardens program. And then in terms of level of subsidy, our thought is to have each voucher be valued at up to $2,000, and allowing the voucher to cover not just the cost of the bike itself, but safety equipment like the helmet, lights, lock, that sort of thing. One point that we're still thinking about is whether to allow the vouchers to cover costs of standard non-electric e-bikes. We've heard some feedback through developing this program that there may be use cases where someone who receives the voucher might actually prefer a standard non-electric bike over an e-bike. For instance, if they're in multifamily and multi-story housing and don't have an elevator and don't have a secure place to lock up or safely store an level, it's going to be hard for that person to lug a heavier e-bike up several flights of stairs. You know, our goal is to get folks commuting sustainably and giving them more access to clean transportation. Reducing emissions is definitely a part of it, but standard bikes, you know, have a cleaner footprint than cars or even e-bikes. So considering having that be part of the program, would be curious. And then in terms of number of vouchers offered, given our program budget from the grant and from OSC's budget, we're thinking that that'll fund in 2024 about 90 vouchers. That number could increase if folks use their voucher to purchase a bike less than $2,000, right? Like that remaining money for each of those vouchers will roll back into the pot and could potentially fund additional vouchers. And then we'd be selecting voucher recipients through a series of lotteries that's open to all Santa Monica residents if they can prove that they're eligible based on their income. Here is a look at our tentative implementation timeline. So we're back there in fall 2023. We've submitted the application to formally receive the grant. Still waiting to hear back about that. We've submitted that application to receive a fellow and have been selected for that. And we have gone through an RFP process to select bike shops who've indicated that they're interested in participating. We can't formally select those bike shops until we already have the formal grant agreement. So thinking that that might get pushed back to about January based on the fact that we're already coming up on the holidays, but hopefully soon. And then starting in.
Waiting for official confirmation that we have money in formula funding, so we'll get it. It's just a matter of time.
Yeah, that's a good clarification. We have every indication that our project meets all the criteria. They've given us the AOK on our pre-award information sheet, so it's just bureaucracy at this point. And then in winter, we will have our fellow be onboarded. They can help us dig into some of the details of program design a little bit more. We will begin doing public outreach about the program, which we haven't formally started doing yet. And then the application will open. So we're thinking, as long as the grant is in place and we've got our bike shops on board, that in sometime in winter 2024, the application will open so folks can start applying. And then we are thinking of doing this in a way that allows there to be 3 different, basically lottery dates. So an open application and then 3 dates on which we'll select 25 to 30 recipients of these vouchers. And the reason for that is that we want news about the program to percolate for as long as possible so folks have time to hear about it and apply. So in this situation, you know, if we did our first lottery drawing on in March 2024, if someone hadn't already applied by then, they could apply after that date and still be eligible for the second and third lottery drawing. Or if they've already applied by March, but didn't get selected in that first drawing, they still have 2 more chances to be selected. And then assuming we stick on a timeline that looks like this, we would probably be wrapping up the program sometime around fall 2024 And we're thinking of this as a pilot. So, we want to do some data collection, hopefully get some testimonials from folks who've gone through the program and use that as leverage to pursue other funding that can help us maybe do the same set of program again or expand it in a different way based on what we learn. In terms of community outreach, we've got a couple different strategies, and we think that the fellow that we onboard is going to do a lot more deep diving into how to get the word out about this program to the community. But collaborating with city departments is a no-brainer. We've got a bunch of teams who already work with folks who are lower moderate income, so want to use those channels to directly reach out to them. We've got tons of existing relationships with community groups that are focused on bike advocacy, sustainability, or broader engagement with folks who maybe fall into that income category. And then we've got our own, regular city and Office of Sustainability newsletters and social media. Here is just a look at some other cities that have developed similar programs. Locally, Pasadena has a program that's pretty much a standard rebate where residents pay up front and then wait for reimbursement up to $500 for their e-bike, with some bonuses if they are low income or select an e-cargo bike. San Diego has an e-bike loan to own program where recipients who get loaned a bike and use it to a certain extent over the course of a 2-year program can get the full cost of that bike covered. And then we've been looking a lot at Denver, which put a ton of money towards a similar program to what we're envisioning to basically give point of sale instant rebates to residents with a higher amount for low income residents. And even though they've got a smaller voucher amount than we're proposing, they have seen incredibly high demand for the program like this. So I think they were oversubscribed within a matter of minutes of opening their application. So we're expecting that we're going to have a lot of demand here as well. And then one more interesting program is that the state is developing an e-bike incentive program that is pretty much modeled like ours is going to be modeled. So it's point of sale rebates, but they have a pretty small statewide budget. And the income requirement is that folks are at or below 300% of the federal poverty level, which is pretty low. It's about $43,000 for an individual. So even with that program, there's still a big gap that we're trying to fill with our local voucher program. So just in conclusion, we're trying to use not just the grant money, but a little bit of OSC funding to provide these point of sale vouchers, get through that upfront barrier that folks have shown with standard rebates. And we're thinking that this is, a perfect program for now. It reduces emissions. It helps us get closer to digging into that big chunk of emissions that's related to transportation. Building relationships with local bike shops, I think, will be helpful, not just in operating this program, but hopefully allowing folks to develop a relationship with their local bike shop. And then it's equity centered, right? We've got that income verification requirement. And this should say it results in minimal cost to the city because we just added a chunk of OSC funds, but it's pretty low cost, especially when you consider that we've got a fellow who's paid for by the federal government to help us run this program. So I will leave it there. If anyone has any questions or comments about how we could get the word out about this program design, anything like that.
It looks like a really cool program. 2,000 is pretty generous. Substantially below that, so that's pretty cool. What's the eligibility on the $300? So there's a or what's the story?
Are you referring to one of the other city programs, or maybe it's our local Santa Monica, Electrify Santa Monica?
Electrifies.
Yeah, let me pull up one more slide that sort of compares the programs that exist related to e-bikes. What we were talking about today is this middle column.
I didn't even think the existence of the program or one that's lapsed or what. One to the left.
The one to the left is an existing program. The Electrify Santa Monica rebate has been around for a few years, but e-bikes as an eligible project for the Electrify Santa Monica rebate is very new. We haven't spoken to the commission about that. And one thing that I should say is that the Electrify Santa Monica rebate is paused for the moment because we have more or less exhausted our budget for the fiscal year. Moving forward, once that budget gets replenished or money gets freed up in this fiscal year, e-bikes will continue to be something that folks of any income level can qualify for. That is a lower rebate amount of just $300.
Other questions? I have one. Or Rob, do you have a question?
Well, just what is the pros and cons of, you know, giving 90 people full cost versus, you know, some larger number of people full costs?
Yeah, we thought about that a lot. And what we've heard from folks who've run programs like this or who are involved in either bike shops or bike advocacy groups is that while there are a lot of bikes on the market that might cost substantially less than $2,000, they tend to break down and not be as reliable as the bikes that are $1,500 or closer to $2,000. And local bike shops in Santa Monica, we've looked at their inventory of bikes that they're selling now or plan to sell, and the good quality bikes that we would feel comfortable helping folks out to purchase are between $1,500 and $2,000. So
I just, unfortunately, I just did this. So, and spent 2 months and sort of researching. There's, like, I think that the price point's more like $1,200 nowadays. You know, it's really come down like a solid $300. So, I mean, I don't know, but I mean, $2,000 doesn't mean they have to spend the whole $2,000. It does mean, I don't know if you give yourself the flexibility of $1,500 than $2,000, but I agree, it shouldn't be $1,000.
Yeah.
But $1,500, I think, pretty damn good.
And I was also asking about, you know, full cost versus partial subsidy. What do you believe? What are the pros and cons in terms of
right.
takeout? You know, how many trips you're going to convert to e-bikes?
Right. So our hope is that we can, as the city, cover most, if not all, of the cost for folks who are below a certain income level, so that it's not a big out-of-pocket cost for them. If there are quality e-bikes sold in Santa Monica that are less than $2,000 consistently, we could certainly, you know, look into reducing that amount. I think our goal is just to not burden folks with a $700+ bill on their rebate or on their bike.
Question I had, and maybe this came up when I mean, one way that people potentially abuse this. And it's, I mean, it's not necessarily, you know, probably, at least you're getting another electric bike. Essentially, the city's buying an electric bike, or the government's buying an electric bike and getting it out there. But is there any kind of follow-up to see like how abusive these things are getting? I mean, if you get one of these grants, are you surveyed or?
We haven't formally, you know, adopted any policy that we're going to be surveying these folks. I think our hope is that this is a program that's easy enough to use that it doesn't turn folks away or make them feel like they're, you know, in a guinea pig in some sort of program. But at the same time, we do want to get feedback and testimonials from folks who are in the program. So I think we've still got time to figure out exactly what that looks like. And the fellow that we onboard might have a vision for how we can do that, strike that balance. So I don't believe Denver formally surveys their folks. San Diego does an innovative, like I mentioned, that loan to own program where it is much more arduous on the person. Who's kind of, right. Yeah. And what we've heard from folks in Santa Monica Spoke and possibly in Chasm as well, Lorraine could correct me if I'm wrong, is that there are like apps that can be used to track mileage for folks who get a voucher like this. We haven't decided whether or not we want to do that, but I think our goal is to make this a simple enough pilot, since it's a pretty small amount of money. Try to not overcomplicate it for us or for them.
Yeah, have some kind of like track. I mean. Okay, so
stick with the party.
Hey,
Just ask them.
Hey, that'd be fun.
Yeah.
Sorry,
How old do you have to be to ride?
I don't know that there is an age restriction.
Don't need a license or.
Right, no, but I think in our terms of use for the voucher, we need to work this out with our city attorney, what the exact terms of use would be. There's probably going to be a requirement that they go to someone 18 or over.
Just be a regular bike.
Yeah.
I think that's a good idea. Exercise. I think it would be a good thing to do if possible.
Appreciate it.
The one I just bought, Solterra 2, it's like 40 pounds, 25 pounds. It's not horribly heavy, and it just bikes like on effort. It's like 10 to 12 pounds more than a typical effort.
Are there any questions from online?
I'm not seeing any. Lorene and folks online, if you have any questions, feel free to unmute and ask them now.
Hi, it's Laureen. I thought I heard someone raise the issue of paying for parking. I don't know, but I'm not sure if I heard that correctly. But a big limitation for people who live in apartments is that e-bikes are heavy, getting them up the second floor, there's nowhere to park them. I wonder, I think that's probably out of the scope of this, but I know that is a challenge. So was that mentioned? I thought I heard it.
We didn't mention that, but we did bring up the concern that folks who don't have secure ground floor storage options might be better suited for a standard non-electric e-bike. That's easier to move in an elevator or upstairs.
Yep.
Thank you very much.
All right, thank you all.
Okay, so we are going to go on to the consent calendar, which is one item, which is approval of our September commission minutes. Everybody want to make a motion? Mark Gold moves. Any seconds? Rob seconds. Any discussion? All in favor? That is unanimous. Right, so item 3A was a Clean Power Alliance update that has been postponed. So we're on to item 3B, which is private tree ordinance discussion. I think Amanda's going to take us through that.
Try to. Should preface with, I am the messenger. I'm not the. One second. So I'm here today to present an update on the private street ordinance, basically giving a summary of the previous action that was done by at the time, the Task Force on the Environment, now Commission. So just to kind of remind you all, I know it was brought up by Jerry at a previous meeting to get an update on this ordinance. So that's here today. Just a reminder of what the private tree ordinance is, and is reiterated in your packet. It's, I think, the first page of this item attachment. The private tree ordinance would establish standards and procedures to protect Santa Monica's urban forest from damage, destruction, or removal in a manner that does not unreasonably infringe upon the rights of property owners in land development decisions. Just to give a little bit of background on some of the actions that have been taken here in our commission and task force. In March 2019, the commission made a motion which was attached in your packet, which was in support of this ordinance. And then in February 2020, we had a presentation done by Public Works staff here in our meeting. And it was initially proposed to bring it to council in April of 2020. Because of 2020 and COVID and everything that the city was going through, it was postponed. And it was brought to our commission in June of 2022. And the commission made another motion in support of this ordinance and moving it forward. And it was just brought up as a council 16 item in June of 2023. Part of the reason, well, there's many reasons to bring this, but just to state some evidence on the history of our tree canopy coverage. We do conduct tree canopy coverage studies every few years. As you can see through this graph, the trend of our tree canopy coverage over the past 8 years, we've seen a significant decline. I think in 2014, it was at 20%, and then at 2022, it dropped down to, I believe that is 12%. Huh?
What is it, 20%?
Land area of the city.
Yes.
Land area of the city, 20% or not?
My trees, correct. We also track the number of trees that we're planting and removing from the public side. So this is the net tree gain that the city is planting and removing trees. So if we look over the past 15 years, we can see the different trends that we have had. And while it's gone up and down, we historically have had a positive net tree gain. So we're wondering, where is that tree canopy coverage loss coming from? So indication might be that it's on the private side. And looking at other private tree ordinances, we have City of Pasadena has one, City of Redondo Beach has one, and City of Portland, Oregon has one. So what is the current status? We reached out to our planning department who would be administering this ordinance, and they said that due to staff shortages, they're planning to work on this ordinance until 2026.
26.
Yep.
Sorry. You mentioned before that there was a 16 item, which is the council item on the council agenda in June of this year about this work. What did that item say? Was that directing the planning commission to do?
Yeah, so
This was their response.
because that was June 2023, and we just reached out to planning department like a couple of months ago. I said 2026.
The council has a response.
I have not heard anything to that effect, but that's the only update I have, unfortunately.
So the ordinance would come and then there are a review of what that ordinance like and how.
Yes, I think when they are developing this ordinance, they would probably have some review process, whether they're going to do like stakeholder meetings or some community engagement. I think that's up to them to determine, but we would definitely would request that they bring it before this body to review and look at before it gets adopted. Yes. The Urban Forest Task Force. Yes, yeah. So I know they're also advocating for this ordinance as well. So they've come, I think the two of the days that I mentioned, it was actually the Urban Forest Task Force that was presenting and giving updates and asking us to advocate as well for this ordinance.
Is there one more slide?
Sliding is just motion. I don't know. Question. I don't know what's the right choice of action here.
Yeah, I think in light of the data that you demonstrated was horrifying. And it's not even a matter of like, wow, that's disturbing, that's horrifying. You know, at a time where you just saw all the amazing things the city is doing on a climate action plan. And then when it comes on the nature-based solutions stuff, right? And that's just completely unacceptable for a city like Santa Monica. Yeah, horrible. And I know Jerry, you've been singing about this for quite some time, but you know, to actually see the numbers like that as opposed to your own personal experience, I mean, it puts it in a very bigger context. And I think in light of that urgency, you know, modifying the proposed motion, you know, should be the ordinance. God knows we've done things this fast before.
Yeah.
It should be developed on I would say by July 1st or something, by July of 2020, and implemented January 25. You know, and I think that's more than ample time. It's generous how severe the data is. I mean, come on. I mean, it's horrible.
Yeah, I 100%. So, yeah, if we can toughen up the language on this.
Okay.
Put a
Are you okay
time.
with those dates?
That
Just
sounds
that
totally reasonable.
Judy?
So I was the chair of the first urban forest task force. And we talked about this then, and that was years ago. It's appalling to me that we haven't gotten any farther than we are.
Why they're going backwards,
Right.
decades.
Right, and in the year 2000, the city gave out 2,000 trees. Now, that was a banner year of, you know, everybody knew it was 2020. But it was at some festival or something, and you could just pick a tree. And they were, you know, like, so the jacaranda tree that I chose is in my front yard. Everybody can go see it. But why don't we figure out a way to give away trees? Just to start.
But I know I'm out of turn, sorry, but in light of this also reminds me, we had a canopy target that used to be in the Sustainable City Plan. I have no idea what that was or whatever, but if we were at 20% before, the reality is we probably wanted to be more than 20%. And we're down at 12% down. So I think, you know, I think there needs to be an action plan that needs to be developed, ASAP to reach that target. So clearly we have failed miserably. So that's homework for staff to go back and at our next meeting, perhaps agendize that item or whatever's appropriate. And to say, here's what our target was, remind us of what you just put on the screen, which is horrible. And then, a recommendation to develop an action plan by a date certain. Clearly, this is not going to get us to the tree canopy number because the city hasn't kept their end of the bargain.
Yeah, could you go back to the graph? Disaster graph.
Don't make me cry.
Okay, pleasure. Okay. First off, where is like 7 years, 8 years? Where do those numbers come from? I mean, is that people counting trees? Is it sensing stuff? Do you know?
I believe it's through GIS, like
GIS,
aerial. Yeah.
Remote sensing.
Is the county cameras going? Where they,
Like a LiDAR.
Yeah, we usually hire a consultant to do the mapping for it.
It's actually,
They LiDAR, right? Demo.
and that's why it's like 8 years apart. And do we know what the pie chart is for how much of this is people cutting down trees? How much is bigger and how much is it more street trees dying because of the drought?
Don't know if we can get that.
it's almost, what Matthew Wells told us, I was looking at this the last meeting. He gave us a presentation on that specifically. June 2022. So at that meeting, he told us that the overwhelming majority was trees on private.
He's cut down.
Yeah, there's, I think the public tree over the same time period dropped less than 1%. Even though they planted a lot.
That can't be true. Not into that 3-year period.
And it seems like like you can't fill out.
Well, but that's what this ordinance.
No, that's what
Yeah.
That's what this ordinance is. That's what I'm asking. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
It's not about.
No, keep so. Yeah.
Because I haven't cut down trees. They were all infected and causing major issues. So it was, and they were over problems. But so I worry about that balance of why.
That's
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
Jerry. First of all, thank Judy, Susan McCarthy. About 13 years ago now. They've done a good job getting all the public trees and doing it, and then postponing the private trees because they wanted to do a good job on the public trees. We understand that. It's been such a long time. And I personally understand how COVID is hit. It affected a lot of things. Because this is crucial for everything that we sustainability in the environment. And I found often, it almost seems like most people feel it goes without saying, we love our trees and we need to plant more. We don't hear as much about it. From a letter to the LA Times, this whole thing, solar, and all those important things, but not one word about how trees affect climate change. Get rid of all the stuff, polluting everything, water, sandy rivers. People all know this. So I agree with what Mark said. 2026. If we could just pass a resolution, if you guys would be so kind, to add the same words added before. I believe the words you added was strongly support, or whatever, even stronger than that. And to, it wouldn't be unreasonable.
That's exactly Mark already proposed that.
But I also want to give credit. Happy well. And Urban Forest Task Force, others were consolidating it. I'm learning a lot of stuff, and there's a lot of good people there. Matthew Wells and the new Urban Forester, Robert Castaneda, are doing an excellent job. And I agree wholeheartedly, a fair, reasonable plan that still does real lots of good stuff for our trees. Lets people know what to expect, make it easier for people.
And those are the exact motions we passed. So we're, I'm just trying to raise a lot.
I just want to say thank you.
Well, thank you for putting it up. Thank you for getting it on the agenda. And keeping it on the agenda. Do we have any comments from folks or questions online?
Yeah, we still have one more. Any questions or comments online?
No? Okay. All right, well, so we have a draft motion on the table. Could you pull that up again?
Yes.
Basically, that motion with Mark's
Dates.
recommended dates. Which is slide number 8. So our draft motion is that our commission strongly urges city council to
I'm gonna see if I can.
require staff to bring. Right, no, to require staff to draft an ordinance by July 2024 for implementation beginning January of 2020. For the private tree ordinance. Okay, so we've got Mark moved, made the motion. Rob seconded. Have any discussion? All in favor? Looks like it's unanimous. Okay. Yeah, and we've even got some extra votes.
Yay, extra ones.
Right. Yes.
We're gonna have a discussion.
We're going to have an item on. Saying you got a lot in your head.
That's a big deal too.
We are.
Decades.
Okay, we're going on to our last item. We have to postpone swearing in our commissioner because she's not here. So the last item on our agenda tonight is chair and vice chair. I made it clear when I ran the last 2 times that I welcome turnover in the chair role. I don't plan to be. Well, for a couple of reasons. You've noticed that Amanda sent out an email. Have a quorum.
Thank you. I know this is the item, but I'm like, that's not a pen.
Yeah.
And honestly.
I 100% agree that people aren't turning up for our meetings and.
There's a lot of people in the community who really like to be on this commission.
Yeah.
And they're not showing up. Like,
Right.
I think 2 people hit me up at your age. Said like, well, thanks, you took my spot.
Well, the one thing is if you're the chair and or vice chair.
So
And unfortunately, if you're not the chair or vice chair, you have every opportunity. So that's just one small thing that can help keep people engaged by rotating this. Yeah.
I was thinking what we needed to hold.
Well, I thought there was, I don't know how it works on commissions, but I remember in the past where we were tracking attendance. And if you missed 2 or 3 meetings in the year, you were gone. So maybe you can check on that with the city clerk.
They do ask for attendance and I give it to them, but it's no real action.
Well, can you
So,
check and see
yeah.
if there is a rule?
There-
I mean, the thing is, because we canceled some.
That's,
Yeah,
That doesn't even show up against them.
Right.
That's true.
yeah, it's only a percentage of the meetings that actually happen. It doesn't account for the meetings that were canceled because there's
I know, I mean, we suck.
That's I've been on that 6 months, and I won't say it in person.
So anyway, let's get back to the.
Clearly, there's a lifetime prohibition on the other side.
I think, Mark, you can have a. Essentially 0.
Yeah.
That's leadership.
There you go.
Okay, great. Thank you.
We need to vote.
Yeah, I think we have.
I'm, Dean remains as chair and Alex Tower is, vice chair.
I'll second.
Okay. Well done. Yes, we do. All in favor? That was unanimous.
No, that-
All right.
No, we got to do something. This is
Yeah.
not cool.
And it would be great to have a, chart of the last 12 months or something showing who was here and how many people showed up at the meetings. Because we haven't had 7. Since
That's a ton in there.
Yeah. Anyway, we are officially, we're not officially adjourned. We have public input. We go to the ordinance.
Responsibility for be here in California, the environment still is.
Yes. And there's a lot of people.
I just wanted to put it in. We're all invited. To be acknowledged for what.
I got numbers contagious.
Yeah.
Pizza,
This is
cake.
the 80 side.
Okay.
What's the date?
80s, but.
Yeah. What's the date?
The date is December 11th at 6 p.m. at the karaoke bar, Wilshire, called the Gaslight, at 20th and Wilshire. And the Facebook event page and all that.
Happy birthday.
Yeah, I'm excited. Okay.
And the day before that is my holiday party.
Okay. On that, fine note, unless other folks have any other announcements? Okay, we are adjourned. Thank you, everyone.